All right, in this section, we are going to talk about the struggle over foreign policy. After the revolution, the United States is now its own independent nation, and they are going to have to participate in what is happening around the world. To begin, our relationships with Europe are going to be a part of our foreign policy. The first that we see is in the Ohio River Valley. In the Ohio River Valley, we are going to meet with the British over this new territory that the United States gained after the Revolutionary War. Now, we've heard the Ohio River Valley before, remember with the French and Indian War. After the Revolution, the British are going to remain in the United States in forts that they have in the Ohio River Valley. They are going to use these forts to prevent the United States from expanding into our new territory. The ways in which they do that is, one, through intimidation just by being there, and two, by giving the Native Americans weapons who then would come into conflict with anyone who tried to move into that territory. This ultimately shows that the British do not respect the Americans in their independence. The second piece of relations with Europe is the French Revolution and how the United States reacts to it. Now, in this time period, there are two political parties which we heard about yesterday, the first being the Democratic Republicans. When the Democratic Republicans look at the French Revolution and the fact that the French are modeling after the colonists who just successfully broke away from England, the Democratic Republicans say this is good. When people are unhappy with their government, they should overthrow it. So the Democratic Republicans will prefer this violence over in France to just submitting to the monarchy. The second group, the Federalists on the French Revolution, are going to say this is bad. These are anarchists that are causing disorder, that are looking to destroy religion, and they will look at what the French are doing as wrong. And they also will connect the Democratic Republicans supporting this revolution with the idea that the Democratic Republicans want to do the same in the United States. So you can see that these two political parties are starting to pit themselves against each other. Now, ultimately, it is Washington who has to decide what the status of the United States is when it comes to foreign policy. Now, luckily for Washington, both political parties, the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists, are going to agree that the United States needs to remain neutral. They need to not participate in any foreign conflict because, quite frankly, we are too weak. During this time, the British and the French are going to be in conflict in 1793. Both the British and the French will look to the United States to be their supporter, their friend, their ally. The French because they helped us in our revolution, the British because they think that the colonies owe them. The United States is going to respond and say, we cannot participate. If we do participate in this war, we will then lose our country. It will bankrupt this new government. So instead, we respond with what's called a proclamation of neutrality. Proclamation, we are proclaiming, we are stating that we are neutral. The British are not going to like this idea, and they will respond with testing our neutrality to see if America will attack them if they, in a sense, torture us. Now, the torture that they're putting on us to test if this neutrality is real is by taking our ships. When the American ships would go out onto the ocean to trade with the French colonies in the West Indies, they would take the ships, they would take the sailors, and this was to see if we would attack them, if we would retaliate, which we don't for a little while because we know that we cannot stand another war at this time. During Washington's presidency, he is not going to have a roadmap for what he's supposed to do, how he's supposed to do it. There is no example for him to look back to and say, oh, that's how somebody did it, that's how I should do it too. But even without that, he is going to be successful on many fronts. First, he's successful in opening these western lands for settlements. He's going to encourage standing up to the Native Americans, putting down these conflicts, and allowing us to move into territory that is rightfully ours. Which expanding is good, because the larger the country, the more powerful we then look. Also, Washington is going to be successful in suppressing the Whiskey Rebellion, which we talked about yesterday. Those rebellions that come up against the whiskey tax, Washington is going to say, you cannot protest this tax. The federal government will not stand for a rebellion. We will use military force to stop this. And he kind of puts the idea in people's heads that if they want to see a tax go away, they must use the representation that they have been awarded under this new Constitution to do so. Washington successfully keeps us out of a war with Europe, which is great, because then we are pushing forward with building the nation instead of getting into a conflict that could potentially bankrupt us. Also under Washington, he creates a booming foreign trade. Trade is great for a country, okay? When we trade, we are exporting goods, which we make money off of, and when we import goods, we tax them. This tax on imported goods is called a tariff. When we tax imported goods, we make money. So no matter which direction the trade is going in, we are making money either way. This money is going to fund the national government, and it's going to start paying down that national debt that we have from the Revolutionary War that only got worse under the Articles. So overall, Washington, successful president. When Washington leaves office, he gives what's called a farewell address. Now, Washington theoretically could have gone into a third term. He wins re-election in 1792. He could have gone up for re-election in 1796, but Washington instead says, I'm good. 8 years was enough. And when he makes this decision to not run in 1796, he sets an example, a precedent to the nation that you can walk away from power, and that makes it so that this democracy can survive. That makes it so that this new presidency won't become a king like the anti-federalists feared. Washington is going to offer some advice when he leaves, though, and if I were taking notes right now or just listening, I would be starring this in my brain or on my paper, because this is incredibly important. When Washington leaves, the advice that he gives is that we should not enter into any alliances. He actually uses the words entangling alliances. He says, don't promise any nation anything. Don't promise that we'll go into war with them. Don't promise that we'll protect them, because if we make a promise to a nation, that means we're going to get into conflicts that maybe we don't belong in. So he encourages this idea of neutrality moving forward, especially to keep the nation successful. Do we listen? Probably not. We definitely don't in today's time. When we look at who the next president is going to be, we have John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson. Adams is going to become our second president. He is also a Federalist, supporting the Constitution and the federal government that is created under it. When Jefferson loses, though, the rules used to be that whoever got the most votes in the Electoral College would become president, and whoever got the second most votes would become the vice president. So Jefferson becomes Adams' vice president in 1796. Now, to continue with these foreign affairs, we are going to look a little bit further at France and the United States and how that affects us. Under Washington in 1794, we are going to sign what's called the Jay Treaty. The Jay Treaty was an effort to make relations with the British a little bit better. This treaty with the British said the British would give up their forts on American soil, and they would be allowed to continue restricting the trade that the Americans were doing, and it required the Americans to repay their war debts to the British. So it sounds like this is a little one-sided towards the British because they're getting to restrict our trade and they're getting payments from us for war debts. But the exchange of getting the British out of those forts was monumental for us. That meant that we could move at least more successfully, more smoothly into the territories that we gained, and that was huge. Now, when the French see the Jay Treaty, because the French are at war with the British, they are going to see that as the United States aligning with the British. So the French are going to retaliate by seizing or taking American merchant ships, these trade ships. Once they're out on the oceans, the French are going to say, those are ours. Now, to negotiate with the French, Adams is going to send officials to France, because now we're into Adams' term as president, his first term, and the people that he sends there in history become known as X, Y, and Z to keep their names anonymous. When these officials from the United States arrive in France to talk to them about taking our ships and try to reach an agreement, the French try to bribe the United States. Now, this is a moment where we could have taken two paths. We could have taken the bribe and aligned ourselves with the French, or we could do what we actually did, turn down the bribe and get angry that someone thought that the United States could be bought off, which is the road we go down. To retaliate against this insult to the United States, the Federalists, under Adams, are going to grow the army. This is going to show that we are getting stronger as a nation and that we will not be bought. In order to pay for the army, we are going to have to increase taxes, which nobody likes. What's funny, though, is one of the taxes that gets put into place is a tax on stamps. Sounds like under the British, and a tax on the selling of land. What's different about these taxes now, though, is there is no argument of no taxation without representation, because we do have representatives and they can argue for what the people really want. But when it's in the name of creating a stronger military, most people don't put up a fight. Also, in kind of war fervor, this fear of the French and what they were doing, we are going to see the United States government act out of fear. One of these actions includes the passing of the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. Now, 1798 says that we are under Adams. This is also what your homework is on. Make sure that you are doing the reading. Alien in these terms means is a reference to immigrants. Sedition in these terms is in reference to speech. Now, the Federalists are going to pass the Alien and Sedition Acts because they are scared of what this war in France, in Europe, against the British is looking like, and we don't want it to affect the United States. What we get to do, what the government gets to do under the Alien and Sedition Acts is it gives the government the power, the president the power, to arrest and deport immigrants who had criticized the federal government. So if immigrants in the United States wanted to say that the expansion of the army, the increase in taxes was bad, well, they could be deported and they could be arrested. Reason being is we're trying to grow our military to potentially defend us against the French. If French immigrants are here and they start saying that's bad, we don't want them convincing people that it's bad to grow the military. So instead, we can arrest them, we can deport them. The sedition part of the Alien and Sedition Acts made it a crime for any citizen to publicly criticize or try to discredit the federal government in any way. Now, you might be thinking sedition, speech, saying we can't criticize the government. That's kind of our whole First Amendment rights. Well, you're correct. But at this time, we did not have anyone who was making sure that actions of the government that are passed, like the Sedition Act, was in line with the Constitution. Remember, we don't have judicial review yet. It doesn't happen. The courts aren't doing this. So instead, the states are going to take on this power. Specifically, Virginia and Kentucky will pass a resolution that looks at the Sedition Act and says, you cannot do this. In Virginia and Kentucky, the Democratic Republicans passed these resolutions to declare the Sedition Act unconstitutional, saying it goes against the First Amendment. These resolutions are going to lead to the idea that the states have the power to check the authority of the federal government, that the states can nullify or get rid of federal laws that they believe are unconstitutional. Because that power did not exist yet, the states take it on and they say it is ours. Now, we are going to run into another election in 1800. Again, we are going to see Jefferson and Adams face off. But at this time, things have changed. Adams, during his presidency, had really angered the Federalists, which were his political party, and that makes him pretty unpopular. The idea of the Sedition Acts and the drama that it brings, declaring them unconstitutional, the Federalists are like, yeah, man, we don't really like you. You're not our first pick. On top of that, anybody who passes taxes, whether it's in the name of expanding the army or not, is not the most favorable to their own political party and to the people. So Adams, not the most popular guy. Jefferson and his running mate, Aaron Burr, are going to tie because you didn't run as a president and a vice president. You just ran for the presidency. Remember, I said the person with the most votes gets the presidency. The person with the second most votes gets the vice presidency. So even knowing Jefferson and Aaron Burr were kind of together in this, they tie in the House of Representatives, and then it goes to the House to choose between the two. Now, Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton, former Secretary of the Treasury, still big politically influenced guy, is going to throw his influence behind Jefferson. And he's going to say, you know what, we should all support Jefferson. He's our guy. And because of Hamilton's support, Jefferson is going to get chosen as our third president. What happens here, though, is Jefferson is a Democratic Republican. Adams was a Federalist. Washington was a Federalist. And this is the first time that we have a transfer from one political party to the other. And when Adams says, okay, I lost, Jefferson gets to come in, and there isn't any drama, this illustrates what we have come to kind of take advantage of as the peaceful transfer of power. This is a precedent, an example that is set for the rest of the country's time, allowing whoever wins and whoever loses to bow out and let the election end. This is huge. We could have had a civil war at this time if Adams had chosen to fight this election and these results. But instead, he says, nope, everybody voted here. This is the president that we should have. The other political party can take over. And this sets a precedent for the next, I don't even know how many elections to count. The next section we are going to do is the age of Jefferson. We'll tackle that next time. Don't forget about your homework on the Alien and Sedition Acts, and if you have any questions, please let me know.